Why was everyone laughing when the sirens hadn't even started yet? That was the thought clung to as the war room filled with jeers, the sound of pressed uniforms creaking against leather chairs, the sterile scent of coffee cooling on forgotten mugs. She had offered them a plan. Not reckless, not nostalgic, just a plan forged in realism, born from a quiet understanding of what endurance meant. Yet with one keystroke, General erased it, his voice booming over the clatter of keyboards and the smug coughs of younger officers. Abort all bomber missions. We don't fly relics into modern wars. The order burned on the screen, bright and unshakable. Didn't flinch, though inside her chest a storm hammered, furious and steady. Her jaw locked tight enough to ache, but she refused to let them see anything beyond steel in her eyes. Laughter trickled across the room again, low chuckles, muttered words. Relic, dinosaur, museum piece. Every syllable another blade slipped between her ribs. She wanted to answer, to shout, to remind them that history didn't vanish just because someone built shinier toys, but she didn't. Not yet. Because there was something they didn't know, something she hadn't told them. The holographic map glowed across the chamber wall, red with enemy artillery batteries, blinking with missile arrays dotting the solar gulf. Knew those emplacements too well. Knew the density, the layers of defense, the kill zone that waited like a mouth of steel for anything sleek and light. The F-35s they trusted so much would scatter like sparks against stone. Precision fighters had speed, yes, but speed against saturation firepower was suicide. Her silence was misread. Leaned forward, metals glinting under the fluorescent lights, savoring what he thought was submission. This isn't the Cold War, we've got drones, stealth, precision, and you want to roll a flying museum into battle, pray the rust doesn't kill the crew before the enemy does. Ridiculous. The ripple of laughter he ignited washed over her like acid. A colonel smirked so openly he didn't bother to hide it. Another officer whispered something, a word lost in the din but caught the sharp consonants. Scrapyard. Her pulse drummed against her throat. She remembered being a younger officer once, sitting at this same table, watching another commander silenced in the same way. How she had sworn never to be that officer. Yet here she stood, her voice stripped before it could breathe. "Sir," she said finally, her voice even, not raised, but carrying an edge that stilled some of the whispers, "fighters will be torn apart in the Gulf. Endurance matters, payload matters. That was built to survive exactly what's waiting out there. If you—" Enough! His hand cut the air like a blade. He didn't let her finish. Didn't want her words lodged in the room where doubt could take root. "We fight with tomorrow, not yesterday." His finger pressed the console. The map shifted, her plan vanishing into nothing but static lines. Silence fell. A silence not of respect but of dismissal. Then the whispers resumed, thick with condescension. Step back from the table, shoulders square, spine locked. Each step deliberate. She wouldn't storm out. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing emotion. But inside, her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat screaming the same truth. They had no idea what they were walking into. The siren shattered the room. Low, urgent, the kind of wail that made stomachs drop and pulses spike. Officers froze mid-smile. Screens flickered alive with live feeds, radar locks, missile batteries powering up, launchers rotating toward the sea. The attack on the Gulf had begun. Orders flew. F-35 squadrons scrambled, drone operators hammering at consoles, icons of fighters leaping into formation across digital horizons. For a moment, the room shifted. The mockery evaporated, replaced by tense focus, confidence teetering on desperation. Stood silent in the corner, arms folded, watching. Not smug, not gloating, but cold, heavy with inevitability. She knew how this would play out. She had warned them. The first wave struck the wall of fire. Dozens of red arcs tore upward from enemy defenses, surface-to-air missiles uncoiling like serpents from their lairs. Didn't need to breathe as the screen lit in violent flashes. Fighters winked out of existence one by one, drones collapsing into static snow. Voices broke across comms, high and ragged. Eagle 2 is gone. We've lost Phantom Flight. The war room convulsed into chaos. Generals barking contradictions, staff scrambling to salvage signals from collapsing formations. But the screen filled with vanishing icons. Blue after blue snuffed out. Fists clenched at her sides, not in triumph but in fury. This wasn't validation. This was slaughter. His voice cracked. Send reinforcements. They can't break through, someone stammered. We're feeding pilots into. The word broke. No one wanted to say it. Slaughter. Shoulders sagged, his gaze sinking into the map's red sprawl. His confidence gone. His doctrine bleeding out on the screens in real time. And finally spoke, her voice level, precise, cold. I told you, precision isn't enough. The words carved silence through the panic. Officers who had laughed minutes ago now sat rigid, lips pressed thin, eyes flickering toward her. Doubt replacing mockery, but clung to his throne. Even if I wanted to, bombers are grounded. You don't have clearance, and you never will. His eyes narrowed. She didn't answer, didn't need to. Because the decision had already been made. Not in this room, not in words. In the hangar, dust was waiting. Steel was waiting. Shadows long ignored were waiting. She turned, leaving without a word. No one stopped her. Most were too busy drowning in collapsing strategies, but a few watched her go. And in their eyes, no smirks now, no jeers, just something colder. Doubt, maybe even hope. Outside, the sun beat down across the tarmac. Rows of sleek fighters lined the runway, their wings sharp, their fuselages gleaming. Beyond them, past the hum of drones and the scramble of mechanics, the hangar loomed. A shadowed vault of steel, silent, forgotten. His boots struck the concrete, each step ringing louder in her own head than in the air. She felt the weight of mockery clinging to her shoulders, but beneath it something harder. Resolve. The hangar doors groaned as they slid apart. A shaft of sunlight cut into the gloom, dust swirling in its beam, settling across the hulking frame within. The fortress. Its wings stretched wide in silence, its skin dulled, a relic in every way they had named it, yet it stood, waiting, patient as stone. To most, it was obsolete. To, it was the last card that mattered. Her fingers brushed along its flank as she stepped inside, the cool metal carrying echoes of decades past. She remembered the first time she'd climbed into one, younger, hungrier, eyes burning with the thrill of flying, something built not for elegance, but for domination. That memory hardened inside her now. A cough echoed from the shadows. I figured I'd find you here. Captain Elias stepped into the light, sleeves stained with oil, hair silvered at the edges, eyes sharp as steel. A man who had logged thousands of hours in this very machine. You think this'll even start? Met his gaze, it will. And we're going to fly it. He didn't argue, he didn't laugh. He simply looked past her into the hangar, whistling low. Shadows stirred. Figures emerged, men and women hadn't summoned, yet they had come. Veterans, mechanics, engineers long sidelined in favor of modern toys. They didn't need her words. The battle outside had called them. And in their eyes saw what she had been waiting for. Belief, fragile but real. For the first time since she stood in that war room, she wasn't alone. Why did the hangar feel like a cathedral? That was the first thought that struck as she looked at the looming silhouette of the bomber. Dust curled in golden spirals where sunlight pierced through cracks in the steel doors, drifting across riveted wings and metal. The silence inside was heavy, not empty, heavy with waiting, heavy with memory. Elias leaned a shoulder against a beam, watching her with the half-smirk of a man who'd lived too long with broken machines. You really think this old beast has one more in her? His palm lingered against the fuselage, her voice low. It's not about belief. It's about whether we have the courage to make her remember what she was built for. The sound of boots on concrete echoed from deeper in the hangar. One by one, shapes emerged into the shaft of light. Sergeant Corin, tall, wiry, toolbox under one arm, eyes sharp but carrying a fatigue that spoke of too many years benched. Chief Engineer Dawson Miles, broad, heavyset, grease staining his palms, his expression half disbelief and half a kind of stubborn faith. A handful of others followed, faces she knew from missions long past. No summons had gone out, no orders had been spoken. They had come because the whispers had reached them, the modern fighters falling, drones shredded, generals panicking. They came because the silence of the war room had said enough. "This is madness," Dawson muttered, running a hand across the dull flank of the bomber. "Half her systems haven't been touched in years. Hydraulic seals will blow, wiring's brittle. Hell, the fuel pumps alone." "Cut him off," her voice even, unwavering. "Then we'll make them work, or we won't come back." The words settled across the hangar like a prayer. Heavy, final, but not hopeless. For a moment no one spoke. Only the hum of silence, broken by the groan of metal cooling in the sun. Then dropped her toolbox with a clang, the sound sharp, decisive. "Where do we start?" It was enough. The hangar stirred to life. Tools clattered, panels hissed open, hydraulic lines bled old air with reluctant sighs. Sparks flared as circuits were tested, wires stripped and rejoined. Dawson barked at a junior mechanic, his gruff voice carrying authority tempered by urgency. Crouched under the wing, her sleeves blackening with oil as she traced fuel lines with careful precision. Elias climbed the ladder to the cockpit, sliding into the pilot's seat like it had never belonged to anyone else. "Feels like coming home," he muttered, flicking switches, his hands moving with instinct. Lights flickered across the dashboard, uneven, stubborn but alive. Below walked among them, her presence quiet but commanding. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to bark orders. Every pair of eyes already knew her enough to trust the silence between her words. She carried herself not like a commander desperate to prove a point, but like someone who had already chosen the road and would walk it, even if no one followed. But they did follow. The first engine coughed, a wheeze of dust and silence torn apart by a spark of fire, then another, and another. "Fuel flow steady," shouted, her voice sharp through the clamor. "Hydraulics are responsive," Dawson added, wiping sweat with the back of his hand. Inside the cockpit, Elia's eyes glowed faintly in the, "She'll fly, but no guarantees she'll bring us back." Climbed the ladder, her boots clanging against the rungs until her voice carried across the hangar. "Then let's make it clear here and now. If you're with me, you accept that risk. We may not land again, but if we don't try, we've already lost." The crew gathered beneath the shadow of the wings, eyes shifting between each other. For seconds, the silence pressed hard, then straightened, her jaw set. "I'm in." Dawson grunted. "If she breathes, I'll keep her breathing." One by one, the others nodded. Elias last. He looked at for a long moment, then gave a sharp, single nod. "Then let's give them a storm they'll never forget." Reached into her jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Across it, a single line scrawled in her neat, deliberate handwriting. "If we fail, count this as our last mission." She laid it on a workbench, setting a pen beside it. "Sign it," she said. "Make it ours." No speeches, no ceremony. Each hand scrawled a name, the ink pressed heavy, the silence thick. When the last mark was made, pressed her palm against the paper, her voice low. "Then it's decided." Above them the bomber loomed silent, but something in the air had changed. No longer a relic, not a ghost, a storm waiting for release. The work didn't stop. Sweat darkened uniforms, streaked faces, dripped into the dust. The rhythm of tools and shouts built into something steady, something certain. Not hope, not exactly, something stronger. By dusk, the auxiliary power hummed, lights flickering across the frame. The hangar shook faintly as one engine roared, then another, until dust poured from the rafters, caught in beams of pale light. Outside, soldiers turned toward the sound, faces lifting in disbelief. Whispers spread across the base. Inside, climbed into the cockpit, strapping herself into the commander's seat. The panel glowed faintly, warning lights scattered like wounds, but the essentials steady. "Status check," she called. "All hydraulics green," answered, her hands flying across gauges. "Fuel and pressure holding," Dawson reported. Elias flicked a switch, his mouth curving into something between grimness and pride. "She's ready." His gaze fixed on the fading horizon through the cockpit glass. Beyond it lay the Gulf, burning with enemy fire. Beyond it, the mockery of generals who had silenced her. Her breath left slowly, steady against the rumble of the engines. "Then let's show them what a relic can do." The bomber inched forward, its wheels grinding against the concrete, each roll echoing like defiance. Outside, crews froze where they stood, eyes wide as the massive shadow rolled toward the runway. 8 engines pounded into the evening air, carrying across the base like thunder heralding a storm. Soldiers gawked, some whispering, others standing rigid as though facing a ghost. Inside, the crew tightened harnesses, instruments steady, nerves locked tight. The paper with their signatures lay in its pocket, heavy as steel. The fortress reached the runway, its shadow stretching long into the twilight. Hands tightened on the throttles. The moment of hesitation had passed. The choice was made. The war room might have silenced her, but here, under the roar of steel and fire, she would not be ignored. The runway stretched before them, shimmering in the last glow of the sun. The bomber's engines screamed higher, rattling the base windows, shaking dust from rafters, carrying a promise across the horizon. Every heartbeat in the cockpit aligned with the roar, every hand steady, every gaze fixed forward. The ground trembled. The past was awake. And mocked, silence dismissed, was about to answer with thunder. Why did the runway look endless when she knew it was only concrete? Gripped the throttles, shoulders tight, her eyes locked forward as the bomber crept into position. The fortress groaned, its 8 engines thundering like chained beasts desperate to break free. Inside the cockpit, every dial shook, warning lights scattered red across the panels, but the essential gauges held. The crew waited, their breaths shallow, their silence heavy with what had already been agreed. This was no mission with guarantees. This was a gamble with everything on the table. Elia's voice was a low growl beside her. "Final systems check, hydraulics steady." "Fuel flow consistent," Dawson confirmed, sweat darkening the collar of his uniform. "Navigation responsive," another crewman reported, fingers dancing over switches. His voice cut through last. "Auxiliary power green, we're holding." Elias gave a short nod, his jaw tight. "Everything's in line, it's now or never." His gaze narrowed, the horizon a ribbon of fatting gold. She shoved the throttles forward. The bomber shuddered, engines roaring louder, the sound rolling across the base like a storm surge. Dust whipped in spirals from the tarmac as the massive frame surged forward. Slowly at first, then faster, momentum building until the concrete beneath them rattled like bones under strain. The runway streaked beneath the nose, seams clattering under the wheels. The wings stretched wide, daring gravity to hold them down. Soldiers froze in place across the base, heads turning as the shadow grew, as the relic they had mocked became a living leviathan, alive, unstoppable. "Speed climbing," Elias barked, the gauges trembling. "Lift in 3, said under her breath, every muscle taut. 2, 1. The nose rose, heavy and reluctant, as though the earth itself tried to keep the beast chained. For a heartbeat, it seemed too much weight, too much rust, too much time. Then the ground fell away. The wheels retracted with a thud, and the climbed, immense and undeniable. A cheer rose from the tarmac below. Not planned, not rehearsed, but raw disbelief. Some clapped, others only stared, mouths open as if witnessing a ghost rip through the sky. Inside the cockpit, relief flickered, but it was tempered by what waited ahead. His voice was steady, "Set course, Gulf of." Elias adjusted the controls, his hand steady, though sweat streaked his brow. Course locked. Time to target less than an hour. The bomber leveled out, its engines pounding rhythm into the night air. Behind them, the base shrank into shadow. Ahead, the horizon glowed faintly with the first sparks of war. Allowed herself one glance around the cabin. Elias at the controls, his focus unbroken. Dawson hunched over engineering readouts, muttering to himself with grim concentration. Checking valves, her lips moving in calculations she didn't speak aloud. Veterans all. Each tired but bound now not by orders but by choice. The comms crackled, static hissing before voices cut through, urgent, panicked, fragmented. Fighters destroyed, defenses buckling, command barking contradictory orders. Twisted the dial until silence filled the cabin again. She didn't need the war room. She didn't need their panic drowning her resolve. What mattered was ahead. The sea stretched beneath them, dark and vast, reflecting shards of the sun's last light. Clouds brushed against the wings, the bomber rising above them, steady, deliberate. But peace was never meant to last. Multiple signals inbound, the radar operator called, his voice tight. Fast movers, closing fast. His eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on the throttles. They've spotted us. Elias clenched the yoke, his voice low. Here we go. Stay on course, ordered. Let them come. The blips on the radar swarmed closer, weaving into formation. Jet fighters, sleek and sharp, decades younger than the machine they closed in on. The contrast was almost absurd, a fortress built in the shadow of the Cold War against predators designed for the modern sky. But absurdity didn't matter. The missile lock alarm shrieked. The cockpit jolted alive with sound, sirens wailing, red lights flashing across every surface. Missile lock starboard side, the radar operator shouted. Countermeasures ready, barked, her hands flying across switches. Deploy, ordered. Flares spat from the bomber's belly, burning trails of fire into the air. A missile streaked toward them, veered and detonated in a blinding blossom of flame. The shockwave rattled the frame, metal groaning, but the fortress held. Another alarm. They're circling for another run, Dawson shouted. Hold steady, snapped. We can't waste everything before we reach their wall. The fighters roared past the cockpit windows, streaks of steel and speed slicing across the bomber's slower frame. Their cannons barked, tracer rounds peppering the sky, sparks flaring where bullets clipped armor plating. The bomber groaned, but it didn't falter. They think we're prey, muttered. The radar lit again, missiles inbound, a second wave. Explosions flared close enough to rattle bones, shockwaves slamming against the fuselage. Panels quivered, bolts screeched, but the fortress lumbered forward, its engines pounding defiance into the night. Through it all's voice cut the chaos. Stay the course. Every second we hold buys us ground when we hit their line. The crew echoed her calm in clipped confirmations, their voices firm, not because of blind obedience, but because of trust. Outside, the fighters regrouped, circling again, faster, hungrier. But as they banked for another strike, the bomber's silhouette against the horizon seemed less like prey, more like a rolling inexorably closer. The coastline glimmered faintly ahead, the first flickers of anti-air batteries sparking along the shore. They're activating defenses, the radar operator warned. His voice was steady, low but unyielding. Let them. We're not here to dodge, we're here to break them. The crew strapped, every heartbeat stretching into eternity as they braced for the gauntlet. The bomber descended slightly, skimming the sea, its massive bulk throwing spray into the air as waves slapped against the undercarriage. The sound was deafening, the turbulence brutal, but its hands never wavered on the throttles. Missiles streaked upward from the coastline, dozens at once, contrails painting the dusk like claws tearing at the sky. Locks everywhere, the radar operator cried. Countermeasures stagger release, ordered. Flares burst again, chaff streaming into the air in metallic clouds. Some missiles bent away, detonating harmlessly over the waves. Others plunged into the sea, exploding into geysers that battered the fuselage from below. The bomber groaned, but it kept driving forward. "Second wave incoming," Dawson shouted, his voice strained. "Altitude drop," snapped. "Ride the waves." Elias shoved the yoke forward, the bomber plunging lower, so close to the ocean that spray pelted the windows. The massive frame howled against the drag, engines screaming, but the sudden drop confused tracking systems. Missiles overshot, spiraling into the clouds or slamming into the water behind. The crew clung to their stations, knuckles white, eyes wide, hearts hammering. But's voice was steady, threading through the storm. "Every second we hold is another brick in their wall breaking. Hold the line." Then came the third volley. Unlike the rest, these weren't fooled. Guided missiles adjusted mid-flight, precision algorithms cutting through flares and decoys. Their paths unerring, their hunger palpable. "They're learning," Elias muttered, jaw clenched. His eyes hardened. "Then we change the game, prepare decoys." And Dawson worked in tandem, flipping switches that hadn't been touched in years. With a hiss, canisters dropped from the underbelly, scattering metallic shards that spun and pulsed with false signals. On enemy radars, dozens of echoes bloomed at once. The missiles scattered, chasing ghosts. Some detonated prematurely, blossoms of fire painting the twilight. Others veered away entirely, shredding nothing but shadows. The cockpit shook with the roar of explosions, the sky a storm of fire and smoke. Yet through it all the bomber surged forward, cloaked in its own defiance. The radar operator's voice cracked with disbelief. "We're through the first line." But didn't smile. Her eyes stayed locked on the coastline, where brighter flashes flared, dozens of artillery positions coming alive in eerie unison. "Don't celebrate," she said, her voice cold steel. "They'll throw everything now." On the horizon, the shore erupted. Anti-air batteries unleashed torrents of fire, shells screaming through the air in a lattice of destruction. Tracer rounds stitched the sky, missiles streaking upward in swarms. The gulf ahead transformed into a furnace. The fortress thundered straight into it. Not weaving, not hesitating, straight through. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but every ear in the cockpit caught it. "We finish what we start." And the bomber roared into the storm. What did courage sound like when it was drowned by fire? That question sat heavy in his chest as the bomber plunged into the storm. The shoreline was a lattice of flame, every bunker and silo glowing like the teeth of a waiting beast. Missiles shrieked upward in salvos, shells bursting midair, tracer fire stitching the sky with furious white arcs. The cockpit rattled under each concussion, steel groaning, bolts whining. "Port side barrage incoming," the radar operator yelled, his voice nearly lost in the roar. "Countermeasures dry," snapped, her hands flying over useless switches. His eyes narrowed, no weaving, straight through. Elias shot her a glance, sweat glistening along his brow. "You're asking us to drive through a meat grinder." Her voice was cold iron. "Speed is survival now. If we bleed off momentum, we're finished." No one argued. Not because they didn't fear her order, but because they trusted her resolve more than their own doubts. The first shockwave slammed into the fuselage, tossing the crew against their harnesses. Sparks flared above as a panel tore loose, dangling wires spitting static. The fortress lurched, but it did not falter. "Stabilizers hit," Dawson shouted, wrestling with his readouts. "Compensate manually," barked, her voice unshaken. He grunted, twisting dials, rerouting hydraulics with fingers slick in sweat and grease. The bomber bucked, then steadied, though every movement now came with a groan like an old warrior forced back into battle. "Brace," Elias roared as another detonation burst close, rattling the glass. Shrapnel clanged against the frame, sparks exploding across the windshield. His cheek was streaked with soot, but her voice rang steady. She's holding. His jaw tightened. She'll hold until we finish. The coastline loomed larger. Angular towers, radar dishes, missile silos bristling like claws. This wasn't just a defensive wall. It was a fortress built to humiliate intruders, and they were flying straight into its heart. "Targets locking," the radar operator cried, his knuckles white on the console. His tone sharpened, calm threaded through urgency. "All stations, ready to deploy." Below, the bomb bay groaned. Metal scraped, hydraulics whining in protest. Then the warning lights flared red. "Bay doors jammed," Dawson bellowed. For an instant, silence froze the cabin. The very system they had risked everything for, the belly that carried their thunder, was sealed. His voice cut through, fierce as a blade. "Override, manual release." Dawson and leapt from their seats, tearing down the narrow corridor into the bomber's gut. The air there was choked with smoke, sparks flickering from wounded wiring. Pipes rattled overhead as the fortress jolted under another near strike. They reached the lever, thick and rusted from years of neglect. Dawson's massive hands gripped it, muscles bulging as he heaved. It resisted, unmoved for decades. Braced beside him, adding her weight, her teeth clenched. "Come on," Dawson roared, veins straining in his neck. Another explosion shook the bomber, nearly knocking them to the deck. Dust rained from above, steel groaning as if the fortress itself resisted. Then, with a violent crack, the lever gave way. In the cockpit, Arya saw the indicator flip. "Bomb bay open." "Didn't wait. Release first wave." The fortress shuddered, a deep rumble tearing through its frame. Shadows tumbled free, sleek forms slicing downward into the wall of defenses. Seconds later, the horizon convulsed. Columns of fire tore across the shoreline, missile batteries vanishing in pillars of smoke and dust. Bunkers cracked open, their shells flung skyward. Radar towers splintered, collapsing into twisted ruins. The crew jolted in their seats as shockwaves buffeted the bomber. The gulf lit as though a second sun had risen from the sea. Cheers erupted across the intercom. Direct hits were tearing them apart. But didn't smile. Her eyes burned with something harder, colder. "We're not finished. Ready second wave." Beneath them, deeper emplacements stirred. Fresh silos yawning open, reserve batteries coming online. The enemy scrambling to recover, their wall fractured but not broken. "They're still firing," Elias shouted, banking slightly as tracers whipped past the nose. "Then we take everything they have left," answered, her tone sharp as steel. The bay doors groaned, still forced open, metal shrieking under the wind's grip. Inside, Dawson and scrambled back, their faces blackened with soot, eyes fierce with adrenaline. "Targets realigned," Dawson called. "Second wave ready," added, her voice steady despite the chaos. His hand hovered, then fell. "Release." The bomber convulsed again as its belly emptied. The earth below rippled in detonations, explosions chaining together in brutal rhythm. Reserve missile sites folded into fire, silos erupting, towers collapsing in blossoms of dust and flame. The horizon was no longer dotted with fire. It was consumed by it. From the war room miles away, generals sat frozen, their smugness dissolved into disbelief as live feeds showed the impossible. A relic, dismissed and mocked, was unraveling a defense line their modern fleet hadn't scratched. Inside the cockpit, the crew's voices overlapped, damage reports, confirmations, half-shouted relief. Elias fought the controls, keeping the bomber level as turbulence buffeted them. "Stabilizers holding," he muttered through gritted teeth. His reply was flat, merciless. "Prepare the final package." Dawson hesitated. "That's everything we've got." Her eyes cut to him, unyielding. "Exactly." The crew strapped, the bay groaning below as the last payload armed. Outside, the coastline was chaos, smoke, fire, defenses clawing desperately but unraveling. "Final run," Elias whispered, his hands clenched on the yoke. His voice was cold steel. Let it fall. The last bomb slipped free. For a moment, silence. Then the earth convulsed in a final cataclysm. Command bunkers crumbled, radar towers toppled like felled giants, reserves erased in fire. The entire shoreline fractured under the assault. The cockpit rattled, shockwaves hammering against them, alarms screaming. The crew braced, jaws clenched, hands white-knuckled. And then the radar cleared. "No more locks," the operator said, his voice breaking with disbelief. "Their grid is gone." The war room fell silent. Generals stared, mouths shut, unable to reconcile the relic they dismissed with the firestorm unfolding. Inside the cockpit, exhaled slowly. The fire reflected in her eyes, her voice calm, resolute. "That's how you break a wall." The bomber leveled out, smoke trailing, its engines pounding steady. Behind them, the coastline burned. Ahead, only sky. And in the silence that followed, every crew member felt the same truth in their bones. They weren't just flying a relic. They were flying a storm. What did silence mean when it followed fire? The bomber flew heavy now, its belly empty, its frame streaked with soot and shrapnel scars. Smoke trailed faintly from one wing, curling into the night like the last breath of something ancient yet alive. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke for a moment. The roar of engines and the rasp of oxygen masks were the only sounds. Then the radar lit again. "Contacts inbound, multiple formations, fast movers," the operator called, his voice taut. Elias' knuckles whitened around the yoke. "They're not done. They'll throw everything they have left." His gaze sharpened. "Let them. We've broken their wall. Now they'll try to bleed us before we reach their heart." The crew understood. The coastline wasn't the end. It was only the gate. Beyond it lay valleys dense with radar, roads lined with mobile missile batteries, hidden sites buried into hillsides. If they faltered here, all they had won would crumble. The first wave of fighters streaked across the horizon, sharp silhouettes against the fire-lit smoke. Missiles flared from their wings, streaking toward the fortress. "Locks everywhere," the operator shouted. "Evasive pattern 3, ordered." Elias grimaced. "This beast doesn't do evasive." "Then make her pretend." He shoved the yoke, banking hard, the bomber groaning under the strain. It wasn't grace, wasn't speed, but it was enough to spoil clean locks. Missiles streaked past, detonating close enough to rattle teeth, the shockwaves shoving the bomber sideways. "Left engine 3 hit," Dawson roared, alarms flaring red. His voice was clipped steel. "Feather it, keep us balanced." His hands flew across controls, shutting the engine down before it tore itself apart. The fortress staggered, then steadied, flying on 7. "Still in the fight," Dawson muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The fighters banked again, circling, probing for weakness. Tracers stitched across the sky, sparks flaring as bullets bit into the fuselage. Panels shook loose, one window cracked, wind screaming through the gap. Strapped, her voice sharp through the chaos. "They won't let us through the valleys alive." "They don't have to," replied, eyes fixed forward. "They just have to make us doubt. Don't give them that." Elias muttered under his breath. Easier said. The radar flared again. Ground contacts now. Dozens of mobile launchers moving into position along the valleys. On their screens, the terrain ahead lit up like a spider's nest, each launcher a fang. "They've buried their second line inland," the operator said, his voice cracking. "They're everywhere." The crew went silent, eyes flicking toward. She didn't look back. Her jaw was tight, her voice steady. "Then we fly lower." Elias turned to her, eyes wide. "Lower, we'll be scraping the ground." "Exactly. Their systems won't track us clean if we hug the valleys. It's a knife fight now." The bomber descended, its shadow sweeping across jagged ridges. Mountains rose on either side, cliffs looming, the moonlight fractured by the terrain. Anti-air bursts lit the night, shells slamming into the cliffs, fire showering into the valleys. The fortress weaved, Not graceful, not agile, but stubborn. Each roll groaned, each dive shook loose bolts, but the old machine obeyed, skimming the earth with terrifying closeness. Fighters dove after them, their engines screaming, but the valley's narrow walls blunted their advantage. Missiles overshot, slamming into cliffsides, detonations cascading rock into the ravine below. "Close call," shouted as debris rattled across the fuselage. "They're angry," Elias muttered, wrestling the yoke, "but so am I." The bomber surged deeper into the valleys, radar bouncing with locks and false signals. Launchers fired from hidden alcoves, their missiles curving upward. Countermeasures spat, some missiles bending away, others slamming near enough to scorch paint and rattle bones. The crew rode every impact like a wave, jaws clenched, eyes wide but unbroken. "Second line is folding," the radar operator gasped, disbelief in his voice. "We're punching through." But didn't relax. Her gaze burned forward past the valleys toward the heart of the grid. "They'll have a reserve. The command hub won't be undefended." Her words proved true. Beyond the valleys, a plateau opened wide, a flat scar of earth bristling with launchers, radar towers, and heavy guns. Floodlights cut through the night, painting the sky in harsh beams. "There it is," Elias whispered. The radar screamed with locks, more than they had seen yet. Dozens, hundreds. "This is their core," said, her voice calm even as the alarms shrieked. "We take this, they break. We fall here, everything we've done burns out." The crew nodded, no hesitation. Every face was ash-streaked, sweat-soaked, eyes burning with the same fire. "Then we finish it," Elias muttered. The plateau erupted. Missiles surged upward in swarms, artillery pounding, the sky a storm of fire. The bomber dove lower, engines howling, flares bursting, countermeasures scattering. Explosions painted the night in violent orange, shockwaves hammering the fuselage. Panels tore free, the bomber shuddering like a wounded giant. Warnings screamed across every console. "Hydraulics failing," Dawson roared. "Stabilizers locked," shouted back. His voice cut clean. "Keep her steady, this is it." The bay doors rattled open, battered, screaming against the wind. The last payload armed, green lights flickering across the panel. "Targets locked," the radar operator stammered, disbelief in his tone. "We've got them." His voice was soft now, almost a whisper, then let it fall. The bombs released, tumbling into the storm. Seconds stretched, every breath caught. Then the plateau convulsed. Explosions chained across the ground, silos erupting, towers collapsing, guns silenced in blossoms of fire. The entire command hub fractured, flames leaping skyward as steel crumpled. The sky cleared, alarms dulled. The radar, once screaming with threats, flickered to silence. In the cockpit, no one cheered, no one shouted. They only sat, breathless, staring at the fire consuming the plateau. Exhaled, her voice quiet but resolute. "That was the heart. Without it, the body dies." The bomber banked, its engines roaring through the smoke. Behind them, the enemy's fortress burned. Ahead, only silence. But in that silence, every crew member felt the weight of what still lingered. They had survived the storm, but survival had its own cost, one they had yet to reckon with. Why did victory feel so heavy when it was bought with survival? The bomber flew on, its engines growling, its frame trembling with every gust of wind. The plateau burned behind them, a scar of orange flame stretching across the horizon. On the radar, silence, no locks, no pursuit. The enemy's heart was broken. Yet inside the cockpit, no one felt triumph. Only exhaustion and something darker that pressed against their ribs like stone. "Stabilizers are half dead," Dawson muttered, slamming a fist against his console when another warning light blinked red. "She's flying, but barely." "Fuel lines leaking from port wing," added, her voice tight. "We're bleeding every mile we fly." Elias kept both hands on the yoke, his arms stiff with fatigue, sweat dripping into his collar. "Engines 4 and 5 are running hot," They won't last. Listened, her eyes fixed ahead. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, her chest ached with the weight of each word. Every system failing was another truth whispered against the silence. This machine isn't meant to come home. The crew knew it too. They didn't say it, but their silence said enough. The cabin reeked of smoke and oil, metallic and choking. Panels flickered with dying light, their hums uneven, like heartbeats on the edge of collapse. The wind screamed faintly through a cracked window, a thin whistling that grew with every mile. His gaze flicked once to the horizon. Black sea stretched below them, empty sky above, no enemy intercepts on the radar. For the first time in hours, no one was firing at them. It should have been relief, but relief never came. Instead, memories crept in. She saw the war room again, the laughter, the smirks, the word relic hurled like a stone. She had carried their mockery like a wound, turned it into defiance, forged it into fire. But now, as the fortress bled across the night sky, she wondered if they had been right in a way she hadn't wanted to face. Not about the bomber's worth, that had been proven, but about her. What was she without defiance, without the need to prove herself against their doubt? Her hands tightened on the throttles. She had built herself around silence, around swallowing anger until it became steel. But steel bent when pressed long enough. Steel cracked. And now, as the cockpit rattled, as every warning screamed louder, she felt something fracture deep inside. She wanted to believe this mission had meaning beyond survival, that the wall they had broken, the hub they had destroyed, would shift the tide. But another voice whispered beneath it, and at what cost? Her chest clenched. For a heartbeat, she wished she had spoken louder in that war room, that she had shouted until her throat bled, forced them to see her not as stubborn or reckless, but as right. Maybe then this wouldn't have been necessary. Maybe then lives wouldn't have been fed into the storm before she had acted. Her reflection in the cracked glass stared back at her, eyes hollow, ash smeared across her cheek. For the first time she saw not defiance, not command, but something close to brokenness. Altitude dropping, Elias muttered, breaking the silence. I'm fighting her as much as I'm flying her. Blinked, pulling herself back into the moment. Hold her steady, just a little further. How much further? Dawson asked, his voice edged with fatigue. She didn't answer right away. Because the truth pressed against her tongue, she didn't know. The base felt impossibly far. The fortress was bleeding too fast, its wounds too deep. Finally, she said softly, far enough that if we fall, it still mattered. The cabin went quiet again. Below them, the ocean glistened faintly in the moonlight, a reminder of fragility, a reminder of how small steel could feel above endless water. The comms crackled suddenly, static tearing through the silence. Then a voice broke through, command desperate, breathless. Do you copy? Are you alive out there? Elias shot her a glance. You want me to answer? Stared at the radio. The voices from that room, voices that had silenced her, dismissed her, laughed at her. Now they called out, desperate for her to break the silence. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something sharp, to throw their own arrogance back at them, but the words wouldn't come. She realized then that she didn't care about their recognition. Not anymore. She leaned forward, pressed the button, her voice low, steady. Alive, mission complete. Static hissed, then silence. No applause, no praise, just the line cutting out. Sat back, her hand falling from the console. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted. If anything, it pressed harder. The bomber shook, another alarm screaming. Elias cursed, fighting the controls. Engine 5's gone. The aircraft lurched, dropping sharply before stabilizing. Every crew member felt the jolt in their bones. 6 left, Dawson muttered grimly. Barely. Gaze lingered on them one by one. Elias, exhausted but unbroken. Her fingers flying with the sharpness of someone too stubborn to quit. Dawson, gruff and sweating, carrying the bomber's wounds as if they were his own. They had followed her when no one else had, believed when belief was madness. And now, because of her, they carried scars that might never heal. Her voice broke the silence, softer now. When this is over, I don't know what happens next, for any of us. Elias gave a tired grin, eyes fixed ahead. Then we don't think about next, we think about now. The others nodded. Not smiles, not laughter, just agreement. A soldier's agreement. The bomber flew on, each mile heavier than the last. The sky above was vast, the ocean endless, but the crew inside felt something shift. They weren't carrying a relic anymore. They weren't carrying defiance or revenge. They were carrying the weight of survival, and the unspoken truth that survival alone doesn't always feel like victory. Leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment. The roar of the engines surrounded her, the heartbeat of the storm they had unleashed. But in her chest, her own heartbeat faltered, uneven, the first cracks of something breaking inside. For the first time since the mission began, she felt the edges of fear not as fuel, but as weight, and she wondered silently whether even thunder could run out. Why did the night sky look so endless when every mile felt borrowed? The bomber dragged itself through the dark like a wounded leviathan, each engine beat uneven, each groan of the fuselage another reminder of how close it was to tearing apart. Inside, the crew worked in silence. Fatigue had hollowed their eyes, soot streaked their skin, but their hands still moved, adjusting, rerouting, steadying. Elias gripped the yoke with arms that felt like iron rods, stiff, aching, refusing to give. His jaw clenched as the bomber dipped, then steadied again. "She's fighting me," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "She doesn't want to come home." "She'll come home," said quietly, though the words tasted of doubt. She stared through the cracked glass ahead, the moonlight painting the ocean silver beneath them. Her reflection looked older, more worn than she remembered. A commander, yes, but one carrying a weight no victory could erase. The radar crackled suddenly. "Contacts," the operator said, his voice thin, almost trembling. "Remnants, they're coming fast." His eyes hardened. She had expected it. The enemy wouldn't leave the skis empty, not after their fortress had been torn apart. The remnants of a broken fleet would claw at them, desperate for vengeance. "Positions?" she asked. "Two squadrons, closing from the east." "Time?" "Minutes." Elias cursed under his breath. "They'll shred us if they catch us like this." His voice was low, unflinching. "Then they can't catch us." The crew stared, not because they doubted her resolve, but because the machine they flew wasn't built for speed anymore. It was bleeding, dragging, fighting for every mile. Hal asked softly. His fingers tapped once against the throttles, then stilled. "We burn what's left, every drop." Dawson's head snapped up. "You'll kill the engines." Her eyes didn't leave the horizon. "They're dying already. Better to let them die running than choke standing still." The silence that followed was heavy, but no one argued. Elias adjusted his grip. Dawson muttered curses, hands already rerouting fuel flow, steadied herself, readying countermeasures that were almost gone. Shoved the throttles forward. The bomber roared, its engines screaming, the frame trembling as if in protest. The ocean blurred beneath them, the horizon pulling closer, but the radar blips did not vanish. "They're still closing," the operator whispered. "Then we bleed them," said. The fighters streaked into view moments later, sleek shadows cutting across the moonlight. Missiles streaked from their wings, contrails glowing like claws. "Locks incoming." "Deploy," ordered. Flares burst, chaff scattered, the bomber shuddering as explosions rocked close. One missile veered into the sea, another detonated midair, but a third slammed into the starboard wing. The cockpit shook violently, alarms shrieking. "Engine 6 is gone," Dawson roared. Elias fought the controls, the yoke bucking like a wild animal. "She's dropping." His voice cut sharp. "Hold her." The fortress steadied, barely, smoke trailing in thick plumes, but the fighters weren't done. They circled, hungry, preparing another run. His voice cracked. We don't have the countermeasures left for all of them. His jaw tightened. She knew it. She had known it before they even left the coast. This wasn't a fight they could win clean. This was survival bought with something heavier. Her gaze lingered on the crew. Elia's sweating, trembling, refusing to yield. Dawson, cursing through gritted teeth, holding the machine together with stubborn will. Eyes fierce, hands steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. And she knew then what the silence in her heart had been pressing toward all along. Sacrifice. Not all of them would see the runway again. Her breath came slow, steady, even as the next volley of missiles streaked toward them. Prepare emergency procedures. Elias shot her a glance, his voice low. What are you planning? She didn't answer, not directly. The missiles screamed closer. The bomber shuddered again as explosions erupted nearby. Panels ripped free, sparks showering the cockpit. One engine burst into flame, the wing trailing fire into the night. They'll finish us, the operator cried. His voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. Not if we finish first. She reached for the console, her fingers hovering over the manual override. It was old, mechanical, built in a different era. A lever meant for desperation, not routine. It would divert the last reserves of fuel into a single surge, enough for one desperate climb, one final run. But it would burn the engines out completely. She hesitated only a breath, then pulled it. The bomber roared, a guttural, furious sound. The engines screamed, fire spitting from their exhaust. The fortress surged upward, climbing faster than its wounded frame should have allowed. The sudden burst caught the fighters off guard, their missiles overshooting, detonating harmlessly above. Altitude climbing, Elias shouted, disbelief in his voice. The crew clung to their harnesses as the fortress clawed skyward, every bolt shaking, every seam straining. The radar lit with chaos as enemy signals scrambled to adjust. His voice was low, but it carried through the storm. They won't expect us to turn. Turn, Elias barked. Her eyes burned steady. We hit them head on. The bomber crested, its nose dipping. The fighters circled below, adjusting, unprepared for the massive shadow diving toward them. The fortress roared downward, a wounded beast refusing to die quietly. Guns spat from its turrets, streams of fire cutting across the night. Fighters scattered, unprepared for prey that became predator. One went down in a blossom of fire, another spiraled out trailing smoke. The crew shouted, their voices a mix of disbelief and raw defiance. But didn't cheer. Her focus was razor-sharp. The maneuver had cost them. The engines howled, fuel bleeding out, the bomber shaking like it was tearing itself apart. Elias fought the yoke, his voice strained. She won't hold together much longer. His voice softened, almost tender. Then she doesn't have to, just long enough to get us home. The fighters regrouped, fewer now, hesitant. They circled but didn't close immediately. The bomber leveled out, smoke trailing, fire still licking from its wounds, but still flying. Inside the cockpit, the crew sat in silence, every breath heavy, every heartbeat loud. Closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the weight of what she had chosen, the inevitability pressing in. Sacrifice had only been delayed, not avoided. Her voice came quiet, almost a whisper meant only for herself. Sometimes survival means giving more than you can afford. No one answered. They didn't need to. The bomber flew on, its shadow vast against the moonlit sea. Ahead, the faint lights of home glimmered on the horizon. Behind, the fighters lingered, unwilling to chase further for now. But knew the truth. The hardest mile was still ahead. Why did the lights of home look so far away when they shimmered just beyond the horizon? The fortress dragged itself toward them, engines coughing, smoke trailing like a dark ribbon across the night. Every groan of the fuselage was a plea, every warning light another reminder. This was a machine running on the edge of its last breath. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke at first. The crew had nothing left to give to words. Sweat streaked their faces, soot clung to their uniforms, hands trembled against consoles that flickered like dying stars. The silence between them wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. The kind of silence shared only by those who had gone to the edge together and somehow returned. "Runway beacon in sight," Elias rasped, his voice raw. He pointed to the faint glow ahead, the thin lines of light cutting through the dark. "We're close." Didn't move, her eyes fixed forward. Her chest ached with every breath, not from smoke, not from exhaustion, but from the weight pressing against her heart. She had led them here. She had command, dragged a relic into the sky, and broken an enemy fortress no one believed could fall. But the question still lingered, unspoken. Would the fortress bring them back, or bury them with its final roar? "Fuel gone," Dawson muttered. "Every drop's been burned." The engines sputtered, their roar uneven, faltering. Each cough was a warning, each vibration a countdown. Elias tightened his grip on the yoke. "We've got one shot at this landing. After that." "There is no after," finished softly. The crew strapped in. Harnesses creaked, buckles snapped, hands clutched steel until knuckles whitened. No one prayed out loud, but every silence carried a prayer. The bomber descended, its shadow sweeping across the waves. The runway lights stretched ahead, clear, steady, almost welcoming. But the machine trembled, its wounded wings shuddering, fire still licking faintly at its skin. "Gear deploying," called, her voice tight. A shudder ripped through the frame as the landing gear groaned into place. The cockpit rattled, alarms screamed, sparks spat across panels. "Stabilizers gone," Dawson shouted. "We're flying blind." His voice cut through, calm, steady, unshaken. "Then we trust each other. Hold her level." The runway rushed closer, seconds stretching into eternities. Elia's arms shook with the strain, the yoke fighting him every inch. The fortress dipped, swayed, nearly buckled, but's hand pressed over his, steadying, guiding. Together they leveled her out. The wheels slammed against the tarmac. Screams of metal tore through the night as sparks erupted beneath them. The bomber bounced once, nearly veering, but Elias wrestled it back, his hand never leaving his. Steel groaned, wings scraped, fire trailed. But the fortress slid down the runway, slowing, dragging, until finally, mercifully, it stopped. Silence. No alarms. No explosions. Just the shallow breathing of a crew that hadn't believed they'd ever feel the stillness of Earth again. For a long moment no one moved. Then Elias laughed, broken, breathless, slumped back in her seat, eyes wet though no tears fell. Dawson rubbed his face with grease-stained hands, muttering curses half in disbelief, half in prayer. Sat still, her gaze forward, the runway stretching into the dark. Her chest rose and fell, heavy, but her hands finally unclenched from the throttles. She whispered, so soft it was nearly lost in the hum of cooling metal. "We made it." The crew climbed out slowly, each step unsteady, each breath a reminder they were still alive. The night air stung their lungs, carrying the faint scent of smoke and oil. Soldiers from the base stood frozen along the tarmac, their faces pale, their eyes wide. They had watched the impossible unfold, the relic dismissed, mocked, grounded, returning like thunder out of the night. No cheers came, no applause, just silence, heavy, reverent, as her crew stepped onto the concrete. The generals would speak later. They would rewrite the story, drape it in strategy and necessity, polish it into something clean. But here on this runway there was only truth. Survival wasn't victory. It was something harder, something quieter. Walked a few paces from the bomber, her boots echoing faintly. She turned once, looking back at the machine. Its skin was torn, its engines burned, its body beyond repair. But it stood. It had carried them through fire, through walls of steel, through the silence of doubt. She whispered, not to the crew, not to the generals, but to the machine itself. "You were never a relic." The fortress loomed behind her, black against the night, proud even in ruin. Her eyes lingered, heavy with exhaustion, heavier still with something softer: acceptance. She had broken, yes, but in that breaking, something deeper had been revealed. Strength wasn't in proving others wrong. It was in carrying weight no one else dared to lift, and setting it down when the time came. She closed her eyes, the night air cool against her soot-streaked skin. And in that silence, the moral unfolded, not spoken to the world, not shouted into history, but carried like a quiet truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.